funding to fund the series. It's called, you can see this, Colonial Foodways and Culture at Stratford Hall. And it's an attempt, not even an attempt, we're doing a pretty good job at this. We are talking about colonial culture, but anchored in the Lees. And so thinking about Stratford Hall, which is the birthplace of Robert E. Lee, as bigger than just that moment, right? Thinking about the Lees that came before him, the two signers of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Lee, who established this plantation in 1738 and who had already at that point had deep roots in the colony of Virginia. Thinking about Philip Ludwell Lee, who was actually having ships built here at Stratford Hall to participate in the triangle trade. All of the different sort of elements of that Atlantic world, during the 17th for Virginia, 17th and 18th, and even into the 19th century, I think is really important to the fabric of this country. And Stratford Hall brings a very particular story to that, and it is an honor to tell these stories. And I think that looking at maps in the Atlantic world and the history and the culture of the Atlantic world really helps illuminate the connectivity between places in Europe, places in West Africa and Central Africa, places all throughout the quote New World and the African diaspora. And it's a wonderful way to sort of recalibrate the notion of who we are here at Stratford Hall and the history that we have here, and really highlight that history tonight through maps. So it is my honor to introduce my dear friend and colleague. He has already been on here once, and he'll be back again to talk about liquor. And I guess it is in December, I think. But Justin Fornal. Justin Fornal and I have known each other for years. We met through National Geographic. We both crossed paths with that wonderful organization, which again, my childhood in that yellow room really, I think, helped shape my sort of appetite for history and exploration and geography. But Justin Fornal is not just my good friend and not just an amazing speaker, but he is a filmmaker. He is an international explorer. And he is someone who's obsessed, like myself, with maps and history and all these sort of beautiful sort of textures of our cultural fabric as a world. And he is also the host of Discovery Channel, Science Channel as well, show called Unexplained and Unexplored. And it airs, I guess it aired last year. We're waiting for the second season, but it's a wonderful show about maps and exploration. And if you haven't seen it, you need to zoom in. But when I was trying to think about the different kinds of shows, or not shows, but programs I wanted to have during the series, I really wanted to have something about maps because, again, I'm drawn to them. I'm drawn to the images. I'm drawn to the lines that are drawn through, political kingdoms. And I mean, they're just such these like beautiful, deep documents. And so I thought there's no better person to talk about maps than Justin Fornal. So on that note, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it over to my dear friend, Justin. And again, if this is your first time zooming in with us, he's going to give a beautiful lecture. His slides are amazing. I might have to steal some of them for later, but he's going to give a wonderful lecture. It's going to be about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we're going to have a Q&A afterwards as well. So we're going to go ahead and just let Justin talk. We might have a little banter back and forth or a conversation, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce my dear friend, Justin. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And well, good evening, everyone. It's really exciting to be here and certainly talk about one of my passions in life, which is maps. And just give a little bit of a background. Certainly, my love for maps comes really just out of curiosity, and even as a child, not doing much traveling, but certainly looking through encyclopedias, and you'd find a country you never heard of, a place like Papua New Guinea or Benin, and you'd have these pictures of the map, and on the map would be different people, textiles, musical instruments would all be kind of incorporated in the map, and it really left a strong impression on me as a young person. And certainly wanted to not only visit these places geographically, but to kind of embrace all these wonderful cultural elements that were seen on these visual maps. And as an adult, as an explorer, usually if I'm seeking funding for an expedition, perhaps we're doing a story where we're tracking down rare textiles in Uganda, it always starts with a map. Certainly if we're seeking grants or private funding, if I never leave the house without some form of a map. And if you've ever rode the subway with me, I'm usually have a large map folded out, and I'm just studying it. And it becomes a bit of an obsession because you could essentially travel without moving. And if we think about today, everyone right now is watching this lecture on one of the most sophisticated, if not the most sophisticated pieces of navigational tools in the history of our planet, which is essentially your phone. And if we think about these GPS systems and the fact that you could probably find out where I am right now, you could probably even see my home from the palm of your hand. If we were to go back, not even thousands of years, if we're going to go back 100 years, the idea of having that kind of power on an individual basis would have been completely unthinkable. If we go far back enough, the only folks who actually had maps were either rulers or the richest of the rich. And maps were one thing. They were tools for trade, but they were also weapons. They were the most, they were really the most sophisticated secret CIA weaponry was the map. Because a lot of ancient societies only knew what was within, say 20 miles of their kingdom. Everything beyond that was parts unknown, terra incognito. And we will see that represented as we go through some of the maps tonight. Every time you're looking at a map from a different civilization, the greatest map, the Mappa Mundi, is really a map of the then known world. I mean, right now, once again, if you were to pull out your phone and go into Google Earth, you could start where you are. Perhaps you're in Stratford, Virginia. Perhaps you're in New Orleans. Perhaps you're in Natchez, Mississippi. You could just pull out from where you are until you're actually looking at the Earth, this beautiful sphere just floating in space, and then you could zoom in somewhere else. Perhaps zoom in on me in Yonkers, New York. So that ability to navigate and then essentially type in my location and get all the way, jump in your car, jump on a train, and find your way here with just this small navigation device, which is absolutely phenomenal, the amount of power we have on an individual basis through the power of maps. So you may think to yourself, well, Justin, if I have an iPhone and I have Google Earth, why would I ever need to pick up a map like this? Well, a lot of times when we follow things like GPS, we'll always get to our destination, but we never really know where we are. You understand what I'm saying here? So it's like we can get from point A to point B, but a lot of times you're not going to know the shortcuts because you're going to have a dictated path that the GPS system is going to send you on. It's going to get you there the smartest way it knows how to go. But anything else, like if I live in Yonkers, if I live in the Bronx, if I live in Virginia, I want to know those back roads. I want to know those dirt roads. I want to know those secret little ways where it's one way and then it turns off and there's kind of an alleyway. So by using maps, you can find things. Not only can you find the roads that are currently there, but a lot of times you can find roads that used to be there. You can find rivers that used to be there now that are now just dry riverbeds. So the map is a chance to really step back and see all the layers of geography around you, which makes it all the more educational as we go. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to get into some great detail and talk about some of the great maps of our world in the ancient world. So just give me a second, guys. I'm just going to go into the slideshow. So it'll take me 1 second. Hold on, everybody. Sorry about this. Slideshow, and we're going to do from the beginning. Great. Okay, here we go. Welcome back, Kelly. So as we can say, obviously, I know everyone wants to hear about colonial maps. I will definitely be getting into colonial maps, but I thought that there's probably a lot of us out there tonight who really haven't had a chance just to say, hey, talk to me about maps. Talk to me about where it all began, how we got to where we are now. So that's what we're going to do a little bit today. And honestly, the colonial maps are pretty, but they really don't compare to some of the maps of the ancient world. So we're going to take it all the way back to the beginning. So as I mentioned before, we have maps of the then known world maps. And even with, obviously, even with Google Earth, even with the things we know with the most highly sophisticated telescopes, there is still limitations to what we know about the universe when we're talking about mapping things outside of our own solar system, mapping things outside of our own, sphere of knowledge. So let's take it all the way back to 750 BC. And we're talking about this Babylonian world map. So take a look at this here. And you're going to see we have what is now Iraq. We have the Tigris, the Euphrates. And what's interesting about this map is not only is it the first world map, it's also the first really pocket map, hand map. This map is really no larger than my hand, even though it looks like you'd imagine this would cover the wall of an ancient Babylonian temple. This is really just a small hand map. If you take a look at the top of it, this is cuneiform. This writing here, and it's describing not only the locations, but it's also discussing the cosmology, the theory, the thought larger scope of mythology at this time. And what you're going to see here is a trend we're going to see going forward in maps. If we think of, and I'm going to use Google Earth as a reference because it is fairly scientific in its design. But a lot of the maps we're going to look at are far from scientific. They do contain knowledge, as we can see here. We see Babylon, we see the Euphrates, we see mountains. But then around the edge, we see the Earth is looked at as a flat disk. So this is the first flat earthers fantasy map, and it's surrounded by a bitter river, a round river that encircles everything. Do they believe this? Well, it's more of a mythology. So a lot of the maps we're going to look at combine geography and mythology. When we look at some of the religious maps in later periods, you'll see that the center, whether it's Jerusalem, whether it's Mecca, is often portrayed at the center. Or whoever really made the map, if it was a map made by the Romans, of course, Rome is going to be at the center of the map. So we think of that, the then known world, but we also think the center of the map being essentially the people who made it. So interesting thing, if you look at these triangles at the edge of the map too, this is that terra incognito. These are these parts unknown, these danger zones. So see these little triangles, if you can see my mouse moving, hopefully. These are filled with evil, demonic chameleons and fierce lions and terrifying razor mountains. So it's this idea that, of course, outside of what we know it's nothing we want any part of. And that's one of the interesting things that we're going to see a theme, as I'm sure a few of you know, some of these map monsters from the Middle Ages of these, giant leviathans and such, really find their origins in ancient maps like this. So these are the Amazolic wood maps, and these are, okay, essentially these are not nearly as old, but a Danish expedition, Gustav Holm, was in Greenland looking for ancient settlements. And when he was meeting with local people, the Tunamit people, he was presented with these maps. So if you can see, this is something that would have been made of driftwood, and the local people would have just carved these and could have been carried really inside of a seal skin mitten in your kayak, and it would have been a way to really discern of where you were going. And these would have been something that you would have made, sat around and carved it out based on memory. And it's something it floats and it's disposable, but it's very practical. So this is one example of a type of map that we do know exists, but putting this idea forward, things that would not have survived thousands of years, there's impossible combinations of what maps could have been created from within the ancient world. And I'm sure some of us have been on a beach and we're trying to tell someone how to get to the bodega, to the corner store, and we just took a stick and we said, well, you got to go out of the parking lot and then take a left. And then once we were done presenting the information, we didn't care if somebody stepped on the map or it got washed away. And that's really showing that maps throughout history have a lot of times been very practical. They've been very practical, and once you're done with them, they're done. And these maps, these Greenlandic wood maps are thought to be the same kind of thing. These were just a very practical map. Certainly it's something that also was believed to be a storytelling tool. So imagine you're sitting around the campfire late at night and you want to tell a story how you almost got attacked by a polar bear, or you're chasing after a large seal. Well, so I was coming around the corner here, and then we essentially, worked our way up the coast. You guys know that spot. So these not only were navigational tools, but they could have also been a storytelling device. Which brings us to the Marshall Island stick charts. So if you look at this, kind of a similar idea. We're using disposable materials. We're using things like coconut husks, little parts of palm trees, and we're making these charts. So if you look at this, you're going to say to yourself, well, how the hell do you read that map? What am I even looking at here? If you look at the center here, a lot of this, if you're thinking about yourself in a canoe, several folks in different canoes trying to navigate these area between these islands, we're going to be concerned about currents. We're going to be concerned about swells, things that could tip our canoe over, things that could push us in the water, things that could push us out to sea when we don't want to go out to sea. That's where the Marshall Islands stick charts come into play. And this is something as complicated as it is for us to look at. It would have been also for many people within the Marshall Islands. These would have been something that would have not only a map, but a skill that would have been passed down from father to son. And folks who could use this to navigate were considered of value. That was a skill set that was considered of value, and it was something that not everyone had. And although you would think, okay, that's a perfect size to take in a canoe, this would be once again, something that you would consult on shore before you're heading out. Okay, so we're going to go to the northeast corner of the island, of the, the group of islands. Okay, well, all right, I'm going to, you're going to consult this map and you're going to leave it at home, because it is, once again, this is not something as disposable. This is something of value, something that can be passed down. It's, you could even call it an heirloom map piece. And it's something that you would leave on shore, because you certainly, if your canoe did flip over, you don't want to lose it to the sea. So now that we've shown kind of some of these more primitive styled maps, we're getting into really what has led us to not only colonial maps, but really even to the maps of today, the road maps we might have in the back of our car, GPS systems. And it's really beginning with the Ptolemy world map, which is coming from the year 150. Ptolemy is a Greco-Roman scholar. He had worked at the library in Alexandria, Egypt, which was the greatest library of the time period in the ancient world. And he was a cartographer, among other things. And this was really one of the first map that lays out this grid, where we can have a grid that's actually going to help us give true idea of where things are, as opposed to, in theory, I know Texas is that way somewhere. I know Cape Cod is that way somewhere. This is going to actually give you really the idea of following a grid. And this is what we're talking about, the beginnings of longitude and latitude. And this is what so many future cartographers use this as the inspiration. And that's why some folks may refer to Ptolemy as father of cartography. So if you look on the left there, and of course, we have the Mediterranean is the center of the then known world. So it's interesting to think as where most of the large civilizations are operating right now. We've got Northern Africa, we've got Southern Europe, and everyone is meeting and trading on the Mediterranean Sea. That is really the center of the then known world. And then you can see, if you look at the map, as it goes a little bit, farther east and a little farther west, things start to thin out. And once again, we have this idea that we're getting into these badlands, these unknown areas where there may be terrifying creatures that we really want nothing to do with, or at least till we can navigate well enough to go out there and explore. But once again, the Ptolemy world map. And as you can see, if you look at the one on the left, that is more the classic depiction. But then most of the maps we're going to look at today, you're not even going to see the originals. You're going to see revamped versions over millennia. These are classic pieces of information. And you may say to yourself, well, Justin, if it's not 100% accurate, if these cities aren't there, well, why do I need to know about this map? Well, these maps are historic archives in their own right. They may be talking about cities that may have been buried in the desert. I mean, certainly we know about cities in Mauritania right now that are about to be swallowed up by the sands of the desert, that perhaps, if this had happened 200 years ago, we wouldn't even know that they're there. So maps like this old maps can be very important, because they can show us landmarks that were once there that to the naked eye are no longer visible. But that's
I have to just say real fast, the wind being blown by those like cherub looking people, phenomenal. Again, I want to just cover my entire world with these maps. They are stunning.
They're so enchanting. And in this one in particular, there's an even better one of the little wind cherubs. So I'm not sure what year that one came out, but there's one where they all have like bright red hair and these juicy little cheeks. Yeah, definitely. The Ptolemy map has been done, there's probably 100 variations, and they get a bit more whimsical, I think, with every passing century. But it's definitely one to know. It's one to know, and it's one to get familiar with. And it has over 8,000 locations listed on this map. Now, I know to look at it, it might be like, yeah, it's.
I just, I can't, just thinking, and again, sort of pulling back from this moment of like really diving deep into these maps, but the skill that it takes for just an average human being to hop in a canoe or hop in a boat and start recording things. I mean, most people, even with GPS now, they can't find themselves, they go to a new town, they can't figure out where they're going without their phone. And, I was around before GPS was a thing, and it's amazing. Like the cartographers really had an art for something, or a sort of an ear or an eye for something that, most folks just don't have.
Yeah. And in so much of these maps are based on thousands of separate first-hand accounts. We know where there's centers of trade. We know other civilizations that we're interacting with. But when we're getting kind of even a little closer to the outskirts, we might be going off of one person's diary or one person's journal. And that's why a little bit later in the talk, we're going to get into when maps are wrong. And in so many of these maps, the area of the Mediterranean with a map like this would be fairly accurate. But then the farther we get away from the unknown world as it starts to thin out before we go full on, purple dragons flying out of the water and eating children.
Yes.
But the layers of information they slowly get skewed. They slowly skew until it's full on, bombastic biblical hysteria. So it's really interesting to see that, because it's the farther away we get from our center of knowledge, the less sources that are completing these images.
Right. You can't like literally and figuratively triangulate anything anymore.
Yeah. The one person who may have gone to one place may have died 100 years ago, and we're just going off one journal that was passed down through the family. You know what I mean? So it's
fantastic.
And certainly when we get, like I said, we're getting closer to the age of discovery here. And that's certainly when it's, let's map the world. And whoever maps the world first is going to know where the good stuff is for us to steal. I mean, and that's why these maps were so important. So this is an interesting one, a Putinger map. And this is a map that was originally believed to be made in the year 300. But this was a copy of the map that was made around the year 1200. So if you look at the top, the first image, the actual map is about 1 foot high and 24 feet long. And this was
24 feet?
24 feet long. So, and it would have been folded up in like a Roman map box. So this would have been an ancient Roman map that showed the entire Roman Empire at that time period. And you can see that it's just long. I mean, obviously, we know that the Roman Empire was not shaped like a big piece of bubble tape. You know what I mean? It was not, it was spread out. But so it's so interesting that certain maps they were kind of making things up as they went along and trying different things, and so we're going to talk about a few maps too, where of course we are used to seeing top of map is north, bottom map is south, and east and west coordinate with that. But so many of the maps we're going to look at, north is south and south, up is south and west is east, and it's almost hard to look at. So we're seeing that the idea that of the map, the way a map can be designed can be completely different than something that would be rational to the way that things are geographically laid out. And this is one perfect example where the Roman Empire is just one long stripe. And it's really fascinating to see that. So, and the reason this is called the Putinger map is the person who owned this map, it was a gentleman by the name of Putinger. And Conrad Putinger, he was a German politician in the 1400s, and he just inherited this copy of the map, which they believe was made in 1200 from another scholar. But once again, just as we saw different versions of the Ptolemy map of the world, this was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, perhaps of another copy. And it was, this information was just being passed down throughout the ages and repeated on other maps. And certainly even to this day, old maps from the ancient world are still coming to the front of the scientific community because they've been in private collections, because they've been in some really expensive antique shop and no one really even knew what it was. It was just kind of, almost like the Gnostic Gospels that were discovered and were being held in like a private collection. It's really interesting that some of these really important historic documents have not been scientifically documented or have not been in a museum. They've really been just kind of passing their way from one shady owner to another, and it just unfortunately not making their way into the history books. But the Putinger map made it in there in around the 1400s. And it's considered one of the most interesting maps in history, and certainly an incredible depiction of what the Roman Empire looked like in the year 300. Oh, hello. So here we have really a map, I think, that's just going to make everyone just go crazy. So this is the Madaba Jordan mosaic tile map. And this is on the floor of the St. George Byzantine church in Madaba, Jordan. And this was something that had been lost. This has been lost for millennia, had been under tiles on a floor. They were going to build another church on the site, and they came across this map. This is considered the oldest mosaic floor map in the world in existence, considered really one of the oldest depictions of the Holy Land. And if we can take a look at the map, right in the center here is Jerusalem. So this is Coptic Byzantine Christian thought at this time period. We have spaces such as where John the Baptist baptized Jesus. We have all these different special locations, the wall of Jericho, city of Jericho. Of course, Jerusalem is right at the center. So you have all these areas that would have been so important to this relatively young religion at the time. And here they are depicted in all their great detail. So it's really fascinating to see this map once again, beneath the floor, lost to history, uncovered. And this is certainly a map that's been recreated in other parts of the world. You can see it on display to scale. I think it's about 16 feet wide. So it is an entire floor. But it's absolutely fascinating that this is the way that the world was seen, the Holy Land was seen in that time period, when it was still being written about, when these stories, that were being put in the Bible were relatively, if we think about our own history, these were relatively new stories. So it's really fascinating. And so as we move along here, we're going to start getting a little more serious. I don't mean to get too serious here, but we're talking about maps being used as technology. Maps being used as weapons. And this is the carte puissante. And the carte puissante is really, this is what we'd call a portal on chart. And these were nautical, and this is really, I believe, considered really one of the oldest existing accurate nautical charts. So this has the Mediterranean Sea, this has other, and the portal-on charts are really only concerned with the waterways. So the farther, once you get onto land, don't try and find your favorite restaurant using this map if it's not in the port. If you want to get from port to port, that's what it's for. But once you're on land, it's irrelevant. This is a sailor's map. This is a navigational tool that is considered to be accurate. And you can follow these lines to get from point to point. And if you can see, this is made on animal hide. It's on parchment. You can see it, the way it's been used. If you look down in the corner, you can see it's just kind of ripped apart. So you can imagine, a chart like this would have made these arduous sea voyages. And we can think about sea travel at the time, or exploration would have had much more result. I mean, now if you miss your flight, it's going to be a real tragedy. You might miss a day on the beach, or you might, miss your connection. But, in this time period, if you were going to go to hopefully start to trade with a new civilization, or you're trying to find a new area to explore, if this map was not accurate, or if you read it wrong, it didn't mean you were going to be late. It didn't mean that you were going to, it meant you were most likely going to die. You were going to die, and if you didn't die, well, if you had to go back and answer to your investors or to the crown, chances are you might die or be imprisoned when you get home. So these tools were, yeah.
Talk about making a wrong turn.
Yeah, exactly. Make a wrong turn, and you're certainly,
it's over.
Folks have never seen you before, and to be perfectly honest, they have good reason to be apprehensive if they have seen you before. So it's, if you're showing up, and these charts, once again, these are tools of war. These are tools of navigation, but they're of the utmost importance. And I know that for most of us to look at this and think about getting in a ship and saying, okay, we got the carte puissante, we're going to get there, it's almost daunting. So it shows you kind of the abilities, and the abilities, even the ability to read this map and use it, I believe is really somewhat of a lost art, but it's absolutely fascinating that this was cutting edge technology in the year 1275. If and one thing I will say, if we think about pirates, if we think about, going to war and really looting other people's ships. So we're going to have a big battle, and we think we're going to take the weapons, and we're going to take the gold. No, probably the first thing you're going to take, maybe after the gold, are the charts, are the maps. Those are the most invaluable things. Those are the things that you want to take back to your ruler, to your king, queen, empress, and say, well, we got some gold, we got some pearls, we got some rum, but most importantly, we know how to get to points A, B, C, and D. And that's where they're getting their spices, that's where they're getting their textiles, that's where they're getting their dyes from. So it's those maps, once again, I'm going to keep beating that point home tonight, but those maps held the power. If you held the maps, you held the power. And then we come to Kelly's favorite part of the tour.
Absolute favorite.
So if you're drinking along at home, it's a good time to have a beverage refill, because things are about to go into overdrive as we talk about map monsters. So I know that, all of us growing up and kind of learning about the world, you've had this idea that, of course, at one point everyone thought, well, not everyone, but a large amount of the population thought the world was flat, and at the edge of that known world were a bunch of creatures like this, waiting to devour anyone who dared to explore beyond what was deemed, safe and civilized at the time. Certainly, some of these monsters represent those monsters. They represent these ancient beasts who are still lurking about in the primordial stew. They also really depict what people believed was in the water. What people, Pliny the Elder in his natural history, of course, we've known he's gotten a few things wrong over the years, but he had, one theory that for every animal on land, there was an equivalent animal in the water. So if there's there's a land pig, there's a water pig. Just as there's a land elephant, there's a water elephant. So a lot of these depictions are these variant idea of these monstrous big creatures. A lot of these monsters are based on actual reports from sailors. I don't know how much rum or how they've been out to sea without their loved ones when possibly witnessing, an oarfish coming through the water. And of course, it looks as if it's some diabolical
sea pig,
serpent.
they're
Yeah,
out there.
Exactly. So like I said, there's certainly, and of course, there is the idea that we want other people to think that these monsters are out there so they don't try and mess with our trade routes. So there's endless theories. If you look down in the corner, I think perhaps the most diabolical, we even have normal creatures like a lobster, but if you make it 20 feet, well, then it can pick up a small man and just pinch him in half.
I'll just say right now, if there was a lobster that big, I would be very happy because that tail would be mine. So.
I would love to have a lobster tail the size of a Volkswagen bus. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, or a Cadillac. I would take it in a heartbeat. Actually, I'm more of a claw fan, but yeah. These monsters that you are showing here, these are the things that literally, my imagination as a child was outrageous, and these are the things that fed it, as I thought about the past, as I thought about fear and, nightmares and all of these things. I love the fact that they're also symbolic of just the fear of travel and the fear of the unknown, because we think now, we know the square footage of the earth, we have all this data, and it's a really sort of safe and sort of secure time in the history of humans. But back then, my God, in the middle slide, you could have that weird G thing. I don't know what that is, like a horse and a dragon mixed together. That could have been just rolling up the Potomac, saying hi to the leaves. Yeah. I wouldn't go in that water. But, it's one of those things where I think the imagination and the fear and all the emotions of that particular moment and visual culture, I think really has this certain kind of sort of aesthetic that just shows you like the literal feelings and emotions of the period.
Yeah, very much so. And a lot of these too as well do actually represent bad tides, shallow water, place like actual nautical dangers being represented through the idea of a big whale that's going to swallow you. Could be a maelstrom or a whirlpool, or like this lobster is going to chop you up, can chop up your boat. We're talking about perhaps some really bad jagged rocks where you're going to break your ship. So some of these things are kind of winks and nods, certainly to sailors and kind of a, hey, watch out this area for this particular, obstacle that could get in your way.
Yeah, and the amount of ships that left that never came back, even from Virginia. It's just, it's countless. We have a question here from Dave, or a comment moreover. It says, looks like inspiration for aliens depicted in sci-fi TV. It is still what we think about of life outside of our galaxy. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think thinking about the Atlantic world the same way that we think about now space exploration is a pretty good parallel. So thank you, Dave, for that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That comment.
And certainly, yeah, on a personal level, it was these maps as a child. I loved monsters more than anything as a child. And to look at these maps, I was like, very young child at the time, but was kind of like, well, did there used to be monsters like this? Yeah. You just don't see them anymore. Were they left behind from an earlier time period? And it really just fueled in my mind that when I got old enough, I wanted to go to those places at the edge of the map. And it's certainly something that inspired me as an adult to be like, oh, here's a country you're not supposed to go to. It's dangerous. Here's a country, whatever it is. And it's like, the more that you're not supposed to go there, the more parts unknown it is, the more I feel this hunger to go there, and being pulled towards there, as opposed to the places as we see that are more touristy and populated and well documented. It's those spots that are right at the edge of the map that aren't being well documented and may have wonders and mysteries and don't have the support that really pull me in, you know. And I think that these maps couldn't represent that more. Like, you know, who doesn't want to go on the giant, strange sea hippos, you know, big fantail, frankly.
Oh, definitely. And honestly, too, like if you ever find yourself with a gigantic lobster, if you don't bring it back to Stratford, you're in trouble. So go ahead. Sorry. Oh, we have one more.
We'll have to float it down.
Yeah.
So here we are. We're talking about Age of Discovery. Obviously, I believe most of us know that in 1492, the Columbus expedition leaves from Europe and goes and eventually reaches Cuba, Hispaniola, and reports back that, hey, there's stuff over there. There's things over there. Of course, these are areas that are largely populated, more populated than Europe at the time by indigenous people. There's major civilizations, but of course, when we go back to Europe, the Spanish crown and later the French and the British are saying, oh, well, this sounds like an opportunity. And of course, because it's new to them, they're referring to it as the New World. Certainly, it's not new to anyone else who's been living there for millennia, but what we're seeing now is this idea, the age of discovery. And we're seeing all these conquistadors, explorers, pirates, everyone is trying to get over there. There's all of a sudden, it's a competition. Wow, well, who's going to get over there? Who's going to map the world? Who's going to get all these resources? And how can we exploit them? And how can we essentially, anyone who's not going to trade with us or let us have them, how can we decimate and get them out of our way? And certainly the first step is to know how to get there, know how to get back there, know where you were. And why the De La Cosa chart of 1500 is so absolutely important and fascinating is this is really considered, and I know there'll be, of course, there's scholars who will debate, but this is really the largest held that this is the first, if one of the first, if not the first depiction of in Europe on a map of the New World. And of course, once again, we're dealing with this idea of we kind of know where it is. So we've got Cuba, we have Hispaniola, and then we have England here, and then Ireland is like way over here. So it is a strange, it is not to scale, but at the same time, this is an important map.
The direction is sort of correct.
Yeah, it's really interesting, once again, but to have seen this and to have seen this in a rich person's home, to get a chance to study this would have just been an honor. It would have been a piece of artwork. It would have been something that was an absolute luxury to behold and to look at and to just to get an idea of your bearings in the world. And most folks didn't have any kind of luxuries like that. They knew nothing without of their, outside of their sphere and perhaps a family member that was a few villages over, or, well, I've done this one time, obviously when we see folks who do have to do pilgrimages, we know of the Holy Land, we know of Mecca, we know these places that are far away that we want to get in our lifetime. But for the most part, if you're an average person and you do not have disposable income, or you're not in trade, or you're not a sailor, you're really not thinking outside of, feeding your family and surviving until this time period when all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm here in England. Is there opportunity for me in a place like Virginia? Is there an opportunity for me in these colonies? I'm hearing good things. So it's really interesting that this idea that this new place represents new opportunity to a large group of people. And here's a perfect example of opportunity. So we have the Molucca Islands, and this is a map. A lot of maps were used for marketing to start new trade companies, like the West Company, the East Indian Trade Company. The maps are going to be very sexy. And we're talking about a place in Indonesia, the Molucca Islands, the Spice Islands. So you can see on the map, not only does it show you how to get there, but if you look at the bottom of the map, it shows you the kind of things that you can get there. We've got spices, nutmeg, mace, vanilla, aromatic woods, all these things. So if I'm going to, once again, a lot of times when I try and sell an expedition, I try to get funding to it. I'll take, maybe not a map as sexy as this, but I go to a meeting and I'll take a map and I put a map on the table and I'll say, well, this is where we want to go, and this is what we're going to accomplish there. And hopefully have, just like a PowerPoint, have some supporting materials. This map is exactly that. So we're going to
This
go.
map is stunning.
It's
Absolutely
yeah,
stunning.
it's a stunning map, and you're going to go to some gentlemen, some folks of means who are looking to invest, and you're going to perhaps have some spices with you, but also have the map and lay it on the table and say, well, we can get several ships there. We can bring this much nutmeg, this much mace back. No one's doing it yet. Get in early. And so once again, this map is not only showing the place, but it's showing all the things that are there, the possibilities. And it's a matter of investing, and exploiting all these resources that can be found within these islands. And there's numerous maps from this period that are like this. And I find these maps to be aesthetically really beautiful and really pleasing to look at, and certainly the idea that they were created to be that. They're meant to be sexy maps to get people excited. Which brings us to the states where you can find the majestic Stratford Hall. And this is the map of Virginia from 1624. It's an interesting map. And one thing I said earlier in the talk was that many of the maps that we're looking at are certainly a group effort. It's not one person going out and surveying and being and then going back to their office and just mapping out thousands of miles. No, it's hundreds of people, hundreds of primary sources, or a group of people who have been gathering from over here, a group of people from over here, and then all that being put together onto one stunning informational image of geography. And that's what we look at when we see this 1624 depiction of Virginia, created with cartographers, but certainly this information coming from John Smith that he had got from the Powhatan people. And it had been information that was given to him through a ceremony, through a ritual that you can see depicted twice here. Close up is here. This is a map ceremony, and we can see it up in the upper left-hand corner of the map. So this would have been, once again, as we spoke earlier, about maps being part of ceremony or something that was practical. This is something that was ritualized, and it was not something that was written down. It was something that was depicted as a story. So it's something that John Smith said lasted several days, and members of the tribal group would draw out the map on the floor. They would use sticks, they would use rocks, they would draw it in the dirt, and they would sing and they would tell stories. And this was recorded. And this was the information that was somewhat deciphered and put on display here. So kind of it's in some ways, to me, although it is meant to be informational, it does have elements of cosmology that we saw in the earlier, even going as far back as the Babylonian map. The spiritual, not only the physical world, but the spiritual world, and these power, and of course, things like mountains and landmarks and trees have spiritual value and can be described in ways that are more than just geography. And I think that this map is interesting in that it does seem to have some of that indigenous thought that, in a lot of ways, because it was not written down, has been lost to time. So although some of these things we approach them with a grain of salt because they were put through a European filter, I think that certainly there are some juicy nuggets of information from that time period that are utilized here.
Question, Justin. We have some questions coming in. Somebody wanted, Cynthia Miller wanted to talk, for us to talk for a moment about hidden messages in maps. So I know that there was a recent discovery in the Roanoke map, the Colony, for instance, where there was like a secret sort of like ink mark almost in that map. Do you know of any other maps that have secret messages in them necessarily?
Yeah, the Peter Martyr map, 1511, was a map that we had looked at, and what might be a secret message now may just be faded too, So it's like he had written and described kind of the Fountain of Youth. It was something we discussed on the show a little bit, and it was stuff that was kind of written within the map, and it may have not. Certainly, one thing I will say about the maps is they were not meant to be out of the hands. They were created for your eyes only, essentially, a lot of the maps. So certainly I think of course, there's going to be secret messages, but the maps were already themselves a secret in them. They already were a secret,
Right. They weren't mass produced like the ones you get now.
Exactly. Right. They themselves were. Yeah. They were the codex. They were the secret, thing that's in the briefcase with the handcuff on it. One thing is that maps, we'll talk about this too a little bit, but in terms of secret messages, there are purposely incorrect things put on maps because they are a piece of highly classified intelligence. So a Portuguese map maker may put fake islands within the map just to throw off the French if they happen to get their hands on that map, or the Spanish. And also a cartographer who might be wanted to somewhat protect their intellectual property might put a fake island on there. So I might put, a small island called the Island of Justin. And then if I see you came out with a map series and all of a sudden the Island of Justin is there, I could say, Kelly, I saw that map and I said I saw that Island of Justin there. Well, that was something I just made up. It doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, the whole thing is bunk now, right?
But it's just showing you it's like that idea that, yes, so there would be, false flag purposely. There would purposely be incorrect things that people couldn't essentially call out.
Because these maps were weapons, they were tools, they were highly politicized. So it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, most definitely.
And there would be things, I know that when there was the race for the poles, there was areas that folks went, I went to the North Pole and there was this mountain, would come back and report it. And then it would be actually, someone would speak out against it. So there was maps that were only accepted for 6 months. And luckily we have them on the historic record, but there is a lot of that, especially with the competition within the explorer community going back, 100 years, 200 years of individuals saying they had gone somewhere and reporting it and getting a ticker tape parade, a hero's welcome, maps come out. And then all of a sudden someone's like, no, I went there and, that what was described was completely a lie. And so never even went there. And then that map is, mappa non grata, essentially. But so yes, interesting. So many layers, and I think certainly, it would be worth. I'm happy to answer questions at a later date, but I'll take a look into seeing what I can find in terms of secret messages. Maps.
So interesting.
Yeah,
and we'll just keep on. Well, I'll let you keep going with your lecture. We'll do Q&A afterwards. There's just some questions were coming in, and I was like, while we're here in Virginia, think about Roanoke. So go ahead. Sorry.
Absolutely. Well, here we go.
Yes.
Speaking of wrong maps, welcome to the beautiful island of California.
My home.
Yeah. So there's so many maps going back really over hundreds of years that depict California as an island, and a lot of this comes back to our primary sources, our researchers, our missionaries, our pirates, our, a local person who we might just talk to, and they might tell us a story that is more of a story of mythology. And there's a great sea that leads to it, and it may have been taken literally. But California being depicted on an island is over a dozen maps throughout history. These were otherwise, in some cases, very accurate maps. And a lot of it is that the Sea of Cortez, as you can see on here, it goes up fairly far. And we did an episode about this because there was this idea that some ships had been found in these deserts, in the California desert. And these waterways they were different. They were over just a few hundred years ago. There was some inland seas that are no longer there. And if you can go out there into the deserts and you can see the high water mark, and you'll see where the water was. You might be standing in the desert and look up on a cliff and see the high water mark, and it's 150 feet up or 100 feet
That
up.
episode was crazy. That was really fascinating.
We have to go back there. That's one that really burns my ass that we didn't finish our work there. I know, there's still a lot to be discovered, especially right in that area, but this is a very strange area. This Baja California going up into the Sea of Cortez is very unusual. It's just, once you get up in there, it's just these salty, it's like stepping in like a chocolate mousse cake, and there's just bizarre things everywhere. And one thing we didn't talk about on the show, because we filmed and we wrapped, is we were finding tons of stuff. We were finding the remains of tons of ships and pieces of wood and things in the middle of the desert, and billions. But
they weren't related to what you were looking for, so yeah.
It was just like you just didn't have enough time. We were in such a strange, isolated place. Yeah, not to get off this topic, but once again, these waterways would have been very different. California never, during humankind, would have not been an island, but certainly if we're going off primary sources, there was folks who they kept going and it didn't end. Or maybe they went up the Colorado River and thought they were coming out. But, and what's interesting too about California being depicted as an island is there'll be spaces of years where it's like, okay, California is an island. And all of a sudden we see, oh, good, they fixed it. And you're like, wait, but this map was after that. California is an island again. So it's really interesting that some of the intel is just, you can see it. You can certainly, I think someone could write an entire book just about maps that depict California as an island. But it's certainly just, it's one of those wild ones. It's just really interesting. And there's certainly, like I said, there's a lot of maps that did things that were very strange. And one of the things that you will see on maps too, and it's not just for the sake of not being plagiarized, but there are a lot of phantom islands. There's a lot of maps that have islands that nobody knows where they are now. And some think they sank, and there's even been talk of many continents that sank, you know, and it's just, well, this was on a map. But once again, if we're looking at some of the maps that I showed you earlier, where south is north, north is south, and east is west, it's topsy-turvy. And certainly some of these maps will just give you a sense of vertigo, and the information is just, you can't really try and make sense of it. Once again, the idea of a map as a marketing tool, we have this Margravate of Azilia, and this is by Sir Robert Montgomery. And this was the idea of a place like in Georgia, building a settlement like a Jamestown, like a Roanoke. And it's really just putting forth the design of, okay, we need these 80-mile perimeters. We're going to have a village built like this. And these would have been, once again, hey, who wants to go to the New World? Who wants to go build these settlements with me? And this would have been something that would have been put forth. It's a map, but it's certainly very much part of, let's go build a new civilization. And this, I believe this is the best way to do it. Because it's not, you know, if we think about England, if we think about Spain, France, we're serial occupation for millennia, really, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. But if we think about the New World, at least the mindset of the Europeans, the colonizers who are coming in, they're starting from a clean slate. So they're coming up with all these different ideas of, well, how should we make a town? Should there be a blueprint for all of them? Should we all follow suit? So this was a town that was not built, but this was his idea of how it should be built. And I think it's just an interesting theory. So map making had been obviously very much China, Europe, Africa, but this was really considered one of the first maps to actually be made in America. Ink block map, beautiful map of a quaint little map of New England. And kind of as we spoke about earlier, if you look down here, here's Cape Cod. I'd have to kind of flip this map clockwise 90 degrees for it even to make sense. But then once again, if we look at it, we look at the compass, it's not facing east to west. It's almost reversed because England would be over here. But if we were to look at a map here on our table, it would be reversed. But once again, you can zoom in here and you'll see all the little settlements. And these are, you know, either churches or fortifications or forts. But if you wanted to look in this map, you say, oh, was that a castle that's no longer there? So certainly there's ways to read into these old maps and you can really make what you want of it. And certainly that's where a lot of speculation comes in, and certainly can be fun for a lot of folks when they want to start talking about things like the Knights Templar coming from Scotland before Columbus. But once again, those things are really speculative and there's not really a lot of the facts to back them up, but certainly these old maps will get you excited when it comes to that kind of stuff. This map, for anyone who's feeling patriotic this week, this map was made in 1755 and it showed the British colonies in North America. But what's interesting about this was a map that was really trying to just let the French know what was up. So the French are, you know, have all these territories over here. And so the British said, we got to get all this information together to really just put this information to, you know, put this to rest of where our boundaries are and where their boundaries are. And this was really the map that shaped a lot of the borders of America. And what is the irony of the map is that obviously after 1776, when the colonies became the United States of America, soon after, this same map was used against the British. So first the British were able to use this map and say, hey, look, this is all of our stuff. Take a look, take a look. But then later, the Americans did the same exact things to the British and said, by the way, you're the ones who said it. You said this is a really accurate map, right? So this is all ours now. You guys are good till 1812? You good to 1812? So that's why this map is really a cool map. It's some have called it the birth certificate of America. And of course, there's a lot that was yet to be joined in, manifest destiny as the country expanded, but it's certainly a really interesting map and a really interesting moment in history and what it puts forth. Similar maps of the time period that I find to be a bit more unfortunate is you had a lot of Native American, or as we call it, American Indian territory maps. So you might have a map like this that would break down all the information for folks who are trying to expand, who are colonizing. And it would tell you, what groups were in what spaces, and then large group of colonizers would strategize of, okay, so how do we push them out? What do we know about this individual group? Are they going to put up a fight? Can we do a treaty? What can we do? But a lot of those Native American maps of the time period were really just strategic tools of expansion and obviously strategic tools of war and about taking native lands and making it part of, once again, this expanding nation. And of course, with everything that's going on within Europe, the colonies, and we have West Africa, and we have a lot of other areas, but here we start to see, obviously, this triangular trade routes. And as Kelly, as you described earlier, it's almost rectangular. There's just so many more elements to it, but I think for the basic understanding of how things are working, we have raw materials coming out of, the colonies. We have tobacco, we have things being made into textiles, grains. We're going over to Europe, places like England. We're making guns. We're making textiles. We're making alcohol. We're taking some of these elements. We're taking them down to West Africa. We're trading them, unfortunately, for human lives. We're also trading them for things like gold, ivory, grain, and as you can see depicted on the map, and even to this day, places like Cote d'Ivoire is the Ivory Coast, and it's getting this name because we have such a large amount of things like ivory. So these areas are being really depicted by what natural resources are being exploited from there during this time period. And you can even see on this map the ivory trade going on here. And obviously we have so many humans being transported into enslavement, going back to the Americas, and just keeping this cycle going. Did you want to say anything about this map in particular?
Yeah, so we actually we have a forthcoming exhibit happening here at Stratford, and it's all about the Atlantic world, and we have been very fortunate to have some phenomenal 18th century maps of West Africa gifted to us by a National Advisory Board member, and they all really sort of zoom in, for lack of a better phrase, on the area of Senegambia, where a significant number of the enslaved Africans that built Stratford Hall came from. The Gold Coast, which was literally built on it was the Akan Kingdom. It was built on an actual gold mine, as well as other places throughout West and Central Africa. But I think, it's an important sort of, connection to all of this, is sort of really thinking about this trade as being not just in objects, but in human lives as well. And, like you said, the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast, there was something called the Slave Coast. I mean, there were all of these words, these geographical words and lines drawn into these areas, and when later on, when Europe colonized Africa in the 19th century, they drew lines directly through kingdoms that had been around and nations that had been around for thousands of years, sort of disrespecting any of the sort of fabric that was there already. So I think thinking about, like, even these two maps right here, these lines that these cartographers were making were really literally from the perspective of the trader, from the perspective of what they needed to get out of that area, and had very little to do with the colonies that were not the colonies, but the kingdoms that were there and the political lines that existed there. So, who does the drawing, I think, is also really important to consider.
Absolutely. And that's like when we came back to a lot of that. What's at the center of the map is really whoever's funding the map. Who's depicted as the mighty and the powerful is whoever's making the map. And I think it certainly maps are very much like history books. It's
so true.
Wow, this civilization sounds really great. Well, who wrote this history book? Of course. Our U.S. history books depict events very differently than, Vietnamese history books, for example. Whatever it is, there's whatever the sides of the story are going to be told by whoever's writing it, So So yeah, just such an interesting, these maps in particular, and just as you were saying, just the idea that these areas were depicted by what is there, and it goes back to kind of some of those Spice Island maps. You know, it's like these Marshall Islands are the Spice Islands, and it's like, oh, what a sexy term. Does that mean spice means money? You know, so it's really interesting. We see this, that the world is being carved up, and anything that can be taken is being taken. But here we go,
Bobby.
Here we go. So I thought it was, we're getting out of the colonial maps now, and we're getting some really interesting things. And I thought, well, you know, I'd really love to include some Robert E. Lee as we're doing this talk for Stratford Hall. And Robert E. Lee, before being a general, had many talents, many things that he had done. And one was that he was part of this major project on the Mississippi River in the city of St. Louis. And the port of St. Louis itself was very silt heavy in this time period in the 1830s. And ships would get in, they couldn't get out, or ships couldn't get in. So they called in surveyor Robert E. Lee to kind of figure things out. So he did all these tests with depths, and he made all these different designs to build walls and blockages, and really force the current so it would wash the silt out of the bay, and it actually worked. And one of the people he partnered with on this project was a man by the name of Montgomery C. Meigs. And what's interesting about this is this was a very successful engineering project. Both these men worked together. You could say they were friends. They enjoyed each other's company. They made St. Louis one hell of a port that's still, and his observations are still being utilized to this day. However, along comes the Civil War. Meigs is a Unionist, even though he's a Southerner. He is sticking with the Union. Robert E. Lee joins the Confederacy. Pitting the two men against each other, Meigs' son goes on to fight in the war and actually dies. And as the war is cooling down, he insists that Meigs is so upset with Robert E. Lee that he insists that bodies are buried in Arlington on the Lee family estate, so that the Lees can never return home and have that as their home. Now it is a cemetery, and of course we know that Arlington goes on to become really one of the most famous cemeteries in America, military cemeteries. So it's just a very interesting twist that these gentlemen back in 1838 were, you know, just working together, doing some engineering projects in St. Louis, and the result was this map that Meigs drew the map. He was the cartographer on the project, and this map was created based on Robert E. Lee's observations. So it's just I love these little nuggets of history, these like little bits and pieces, and they're all, you know, obviously any of us watching tonight who love history, it's just so many rabbit holes. You know, you could really just spend a night, you know, diving deep into the early career of Robert E. Lee and his observations of you know,
and his artwork alone. But I think there's a lot of scholars have said too that he could have made a lot of money being a civil engineer, but he just decided to stick with the military instead. And it's really interesting. You know, one of those things where he had that brilliant mind to be able to do that work, and he just didn't stick with it the same way he did with other things. It's fascinating. So
I certainly think that Stratford Hall needs a copy of this map.
Oh yeah, I don't think we have it, but I'll check. We'll see.
That one really, I just thought it was really just an interesting history. So also going on with maps related to and around the Civil War, we have this map of enslaved population of America from 1861 that was based on, I believe, an 1860 census. So this map describes all these different territories and how many enslaved individuals are living here at this time. This map was created by Edwin Hersheimer, and he was an abolitionist, and he felt very strongly that people needed to know about, you know, how many people were enslaved in America. And we're talking about, you know, just such a massive population that this was a map that was a big part of the Civil War. And if you can look at this painting here, we have Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet. To the lower right-hand side of the picture is a copy of this map. Insisted that this map be in the picture, and it is said that this was a map that Abraham Lincoln followed very closely as his troops went into these different areas and observed when they were going to areas that had a large enslaved population for numerous reasons, certainly. But as you can see, it was a very large part of the Civil War and of Lincoln's legacy. So it's just a very interesting, somewhat very sad, very powerful map of how many folks were enslaved during this time period. Do you want to say anything about this map, Kelly?
No, I love the maps during this period as well. I mean, the colonial ones are phenomenal, but I think, sort of looking at just the cartography itself, like look at the rivers, look at the ways in which the waterways and, the oceans and the Gulf really affects those populations, and also look at the distribution of enslaved folks into, sort of the upper South and just how that changes. I think that a lot of this information you can really transfer and sort of look at current demographics, in these areas. It's so fascinating. Again, talk about rabbit holes. I will go on to say like the New York State or City, public library webpage, and they have got just the most phenomenal archive of maps that are all searchable, and you can zoom right in and read all the details. So, I would get lost in this particular map for hours, and I already have. So I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I do think it's fascinating to see the ways in which riverways also really, play a role in the demographics of enslaved people.
Absolutely. And one thing I will say, so this was based on an 1860 census at the time when the population of the United States was 31 million people. 4 million of people in America at that time were enslaved individuals, which is compared to 700,000 in 1790. So you can see at this moment, right before the Civil War, how that population had more than quadrupled. And it was really this map that let the world take a look at what was happening in America at this time period. And so before we close out, I thought it might be kind of nice to lighten things up a little bit. This is a map I came across, and I'd love to Long Island Press, I believe. So thought it'd be nice to end on just kind of a different note. Anything can be mapped. Your dreams can be mapped. Your brain can be mapped. Your kitchen can be mapped. But here we go, another map of America. And of course, we all know cryptozoology. We know about the skunk ape, and we know about Nessie and Tessie and the lizard man of Scapewar Swamp. So I thought was just such a fun map because it shows really local lore. I saw another map earlier today that I was going to put in, which nicknames for states, and every state had its nickname, and it had a bit of a picture depicting whether it was the nutmeg state or the big open state. So this was just a fun one to end on as we talk about map monsters. Here's an actual monster map. And so this is just kind of fun. So this is one you guys can take home with you for tonight. And if you want to go on a coast to coast journey, you'll know what creatures you need to watch out for.
I'm telling you, after COVID's over, I'm doing this trip across country.
I think it's great. I think this is one that'll get you going. We got Bigfoot, Nessie, Bessie, the Flathead Lake Monster, Champ. So
there's Nobby, Momo. I mean, what can go wrong? Wapus cat.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, I'm so ready.
Everything can be mapped. Everything can be mapped. And of course now, especially one thing we see more than ever, we see these food maps, festival maps.
Yes.
You'll see a map that shows all the weirdest festivals in America.
Yep.
You'll see the best hamburger in every state or the best slice of pizza. So it's, obviously maps are fun. Maps are a gateway to adventure. And certainly it's just a way of kind of getting a better grasp on the world around you. And believe me, just as there's a meme for everyone out there to justify your thoughts and your passions, there's a map out there that will hopefully depict the route for you to find true happiness. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. I'll give my solo applause here. All right, so let's out of this unshare your screen, I guess, here.
Did we go over? No.
No, you're good. Just X out of your, stop sharing your screen.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
You're good. You're good. You're just thinking about all those monsters. There you are.
Yeah,
okay.
Just a man in his office.
Just a man in his office. All right. Will you talk for a second while I start getting these questions ready about the beautiful backdrop to your talk tonight?
Well, this is just a divider here, and it's just a classic. You can see quite a few other unusual things in my office, quite a lot
Just
of
a
maps.
few.
But certainly, and yeah, some of my favorite maps are here on the table today. And the ones that have really been driving me crazy are these, if we go far, and as you're switching up, as you go farther north, it gets harder to get good, accurate maps. And I'm planning a big expedition to Greenland, and these were special nautical charts I had to order. And these are places where you could find them on Google Earth, but they're not going to have names. So if you go up to the top of Greenland, and there's all these little inlets, almost everything has a name. But these were really special nautical charts I had to order, and they're just absolutely lovely, absolutely lovely. So if you're planning some kind of unusual expedition, certainly make sure you get good maps, because there will be things that you will not be able to find on the internet.
I bet. Okay, we have a bunch of questions coming in. So are you ready, Justin? So
well, I'm not
Justin
guaranteeing that I mean, if I'll do my best.
Justin will try his best, and
I
I will help out if I can.
How about that?
Yeah. And then if we cannot answer the question collectively, we will get the answer to you, and I promise that. So funny enough, first question out of the gate comes from somebody named Josh Dietz. Might be my brother in Taiwan, zooming in from all the way over there. So he asks, I'm curious what the earliest known paper map was made and where. Do you know where that is? I know there's some sort of old Greek maps, but.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be papyrus maps, I think, from ancient Egypt. I mean, certainly things that haven't survived. And I think just we could do, based on any of these large civilizations, I mean, he might know a better answer than me, but certainly a lot of things have survived, but so many things have not survived. And I certainly do believe that there was, if you look at some of the images, like on Hatshepsut's temple, of her journey to the land of Punt, some of those things, those images depicted can be interpreted as being a map, and certainly some of the things that were written can be determined as directions to the land of Punt. Mm-hmm. So it really, and certainly with like a lot of the Maya Codex, a lot of these things that we don't recognize as maps can be interpreted as being maps. If that
makes sense.
Yeah, they're not looking like this, and they might have a lot more of theory and mythology in it, but for lack of a better word, they are maps.
Good answer. Good question, brother. Okay. Virginia Collier, our board member, asks, were the early maps in color, or was color added to later versions? I know the ones that we have in our collection that are not as early as the ones that you talked about definitely were in color, but do you know, I mean, people have been dyeing things forever, but go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, I think it's a matter of expense. And as I described earlier, we had two groups of people who have maps, people who are using them, who aren't going to care if they're colored or not, unless the color is going to help depict some information and make it easier to read. But really, they want a practical map. They want a map that works and is going to get wet and is going to be on the ship, made of something sturdy like animal skin. But it's the aristocrats who are going to have them on their wall and know that if you're using red dye, you're probably using ground up cochineal that you're buying from the Spanish and is just priceless, or if it's, the ancient Maya, if it's a blue dye, oh my goodness, it's this special pelurgiscate or whatever it is. It's, these colors are depicting, other than beauty and aesthetic quality, it's also depicting wealth. So I think that a lot of the practical maps that are being used to actually get places might not be in color, and pardon me for speculating, but certainly ones that are on display are going to be as breathtaking as possible, just as many depictions of the Virgin Mary are used, painted using lapis lazuli, brought all the way from Afghanistan. And it's to show, my goodness, her blue dress needs to be made from this rare stone brought such a far distance.
Great question. All right, John asks, can we consider some of the colonial era maps similar to propaganda to promote immigration or to advance settlement of the New World? I would say absolutely yes. Justin?
I completely agree. And I think everything's meant to be, forget the term, but sexy in its own way. It's like these spy style maps. It's, you want to go, they're going to make money, or come to these, come to these colonies. This is a place of development and trade. And certainly, absolutely, it's an ad. It's an ad to kind of get you interested in supporting this new venture.
And you had to have money to be able to fund a trip too. Just like now, you want to go on a, expedition, you have to take that map and really make it sell. So
Yeah,
that was a
exactly.
great question.
Exactly.
Jonathan wants you to talk a little bit about pirate treasure maps.
Pirate treasure maps. Well, I think certainly, that's the most romantic idea of a map, and certainly I think we've all made some form of a treasure map, whether it's to find, hide something for a friend or whatever it is. And yeah, I think I'd love to read a lot deeper into it, but of course we have all this wealth. We can't taking it on the sea. The open sea is really the worst place we could possibly take it. It's like walking around downtown with, $100,000 cash in your pocket. You certainly don't want to do that. And if you're getting something illegally, unless you're being sponsored like Sir Francis Drake by the Crown, you can't really take it anywhere. So certainly you might have a place. You might have an island that you know about. And if you go on that island, well, you're going to bury it there. And then, well, like I said, with a lot of these maps, as they're getting more accurate, if we're launching these expeditions, not only do we have to know some places there, we have to be able to know we can get back. And we need to know we can get back and not get lost. So certainly if your entire life savings and everything that you've raped and pillaged for is buried in the ground, you want to have a way to get back there,
Good question and good answer. Gus says, where were you finding the remains of ships in the California desert?
So right where I'd love to, if she emails me, I'll send her the exact coordinates, because if anyone can get down there, it was all our cars were sinking in it. I wonder if I could bring it up real quick.
Chocolate mousse, right?
Yeah, I could get on.
Was it in Baja or was it?
Yeah, no, I'll show you exactly where it was. Hold on. And I'll zoom in on the map here if I can get let's see, it's all up in here. Hold on, guys. This reserve, it's called Reserva Alto Golfo. Yeah, hold on, guys. Right at the mouth of the Colorado River. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen again. So right at the mouth of the Colorado River, there's all these, sorry, give me 1 second, everybody. Here we go. Right at the mouth of the Colorado River, you have this Montague Island, and you have the Sea of Cortez, which is whatever, the Sea of California here. Right in here, this whole area is just, it looks like there's water here. Most of this isn't water. It's just disgusting, thick mud. It looks as if you're close. This is so far. We drove across the desert here forever. And then anytime we got even near anything, the cars sank into the mud. So we were talking about going back here with ski mobiles and going across the top of the mud with ski mobiles. We thought we'd be able to go up here with boats, but a lot of it's just dried out. But when we were out there, we were finding all these big chunks of wood. And of course, unfortunately, when you're filming television, you're not on your schedule there, you're on their schedule, you're on the production schedule. And myself and my partner, Emiliano, were finding things, and they're like, we need to get out, we've got to break for lunch, and we've got to get back to, we got to get back to the border, because we're on the Mexico side. We have to get back to the border before tonight because our permit, whatever it was just, it's go, 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 go. And we were just on the verge of finding so many really interesting things in this area. So anyone who has access, just take a look. If you just go to Montague Island and then go north up the Colorado River, this whole area, especially this is where we were on the left-hand side, closer to Route 5. There was just so much stuff out there, and we just didn't have the time. But we will definitely be going back on our own time if the show doesn't send us. It was just really unusual. It was really strange. The last thing we found before they rushed us out, it looked like it was a ship's deck or a part of a house, but there's nothing around. There's no reason for it to be there. I mean, we could barely get there on foot or in a car, and yet there's all these structures just kind of half in the mud. So it's really unusual, and I think that when the flooding does happen, things get pushed in. But certainly anything really old, it seemed very acidic, the soil. Things may have been completely destroyed, but like I said, I don't think really anyone's looking out here for stuff. And I think that this one right here particularly, this peninsula was the one that, to me, which more power to anyone who can get out there and see what's out here. But I think there's a lot of unusual things right on this peninsula. So you can see the coordinates down if you want to screenshot it. All right.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we got a bunch more questions here. Cynthia asks, let's make sure that, speaking of America and the colonies, how well versed did the professors at colleges and universities need to be in maps and map making to instruct the students? I feel there was a major focus on time and place. Maybe the lectures were contained with natural history, mathematics, etc. I can answer that unless you want to jump on that, but that was absolutely part of not just college and university sort of training, but these kids like the Lees, for instance, I guarantee they were taught cartography and just basic measuring of land. So, someone like George Washington, for instance, he was probably taught that as a child. And, you hear these stories about people like Washington and Jefferson, like literally just going out and surveying the mountains. That's what they did in their spare time. And it was very much a part of elite culture and education during that period. So thank you, Cynthia, for asking that. And I'm going to try to get to all of these questions. Cynthia also asked, I was wondering, and I know this is not the same thing at all, but I was thinking of the tulip frenzy during the 17th century. Did people ever trade in maps? Thank you.
That's an interesting one. The tulip frenzy?
Yeah, I know that there was,
we got to research, yeah.
Yeah, Cynthia, I know you, so I'm going to get back to you on that one. So thank you, Cynthia. All right, Douglas says, in the future, could there possibly be a session on printable documents, parchment, etc.? Yes, absolutely. You've asked for that before. We're trying to get funding for that, so we're going to make it happen. I'll be in touch with you, Doug. Thank you. All right, Christine says, when was the Tabra Jordan tile map discovered? Where was it found?
So it's in the church, the Madaba map, you said? The one in the Jordan church?
Yes.
Church of St. George. So it's the Church of St. George. And it might have been on my slide the year that they found it. It was when they were rebuilding the church. So that one's pretty easy to find information on. It's a pretty popular map. I don't have the exact date at my fingertips right now, but I'm sure it's one of the ones you can find pretty quickly. It's really when
Great question. Thank you. Yeah, Christine. You can look for that. Let me see here. Lena asks, help me understand American culture. Colonizers drawing maps of Africa were disrespectful. Are colonizers creating maps of America's native populations to push them out considered respectful? I don't think any of that's considered respectful at all. Again, these maps are very political, and they were used by the elites who happen to be the colonizers, who happen to be the ones who were enslaving, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think you can consider any of these necessarily respectful, but I think looking at them as primary documents, they're really important ways in understanding the past and the mentality and the objectives of people that came before us. So that's a wonderful point. Thank you, Elena.
One note I'll throw in about the Madaba Church. It was built 6th century, but it was rediscovered in 1884. So
okay, see, another one of those rediscoveries.
So they were rebuilding a church on the site that was the old church, St. George's Church, and that's when they discovered it under like a concrete floor or whatever it was. So 1884 was when they found that, said, whoa, stop construction, there's something beautiful.
There's so many, all the mosaics that are being uncovered all over Europe right now and other places. It's phenomenal, right? Cynthia Miller again says, thanks, not a question, but I love the monster map. Yes, team monster map all day, every day. Nice. All right, Christine asks, how old were the Marshall Island maps?
Marshall maps, I'm thinking those ones, I'm sorry, the stick maps?
Assuming, is that
yeah, so those are new. Those are just ones that have been done over and over and over again. You know what I mean?
Okay, so just like oral tradition passing down.
Oral tradition passed down, and I'm sure it is a tradition. I put those and the Greenlandic wood maps at the beginning because those are traditions that we don't know how far back they go, but theoretically they can go back. There's nothing preventing them from going all the way back.
Yeah.
So the ones we looked at were newer versions, and I'm sure they're recreated. I'm sure they're even recreated just as handicrafts for perhaps the tourism trade, but certainly, they are something that are not sturdy and, are not.
Yeah, they wouldn't stay in the archaeological record or anything like that either because they're so thin. So that's a really good point. Cynthia says, great talk. Thank you. Colin Nichols says, such a cool talk, Justin. Awesome. Was there a point when maps started to be oriented according to the cardinal directions? Any idea when the cardinal directions were invented or when they started being used to orient maps?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
certainly.
when did things get normal with that? It's just a great
That's
question.
why the Ptolemy's map of the world was really, one of the first great maps when we're saying, look, it's not just about here's our capital and here's our religious theory surrounding it. Ptolemy map of the world is like, wow, look at this map. This map makes sense. Certainly when we get in the outskirts, it's not as accurate, but that was kind of the influence going forward. It was like a map can actually be a tool. And then when we get into those nautical charts, that's when we're looking at GPS. It's like, this is a functioning map. It can be beautiful to look at, but this is meant to be used. This is not just meant to be hanging on a rich person's wall. And so and certainly there'll be times in history. That's the interesting things about maps, because we have so much different things happening around the world at any moment in history. If we following just Mongolian history, hey, meanwhile, all these other things were happening. So the same thing with maps. There were some civilizations that were making really smart maps, while other civilizations were making really beautiful maps, while other civilizations were making some weird ass maps. So it's, and just like California being an island, there was maps where California was not an island, and then there were still other civilizations that were depicting as an island after that. So certainly, yeah, there was a trend all coming out of Ptolemy as kind of the father of cartography, but things kept going back and forth for the next 2,000 years.
That's awesome. TM Fine asks, were there any maps from pirates along the Virginia coast? I do know that there were definitely pirates even on the Potomac River, which is really exciting. We think, in popular culture, you think of pirates only in the Caribbean or in the Atlantic. They were all over the place. And there's even, I think, some references of some of the Lees talking about, their fear of pirates and the politics of that Atlantic world. So yeah, I'm not sure. Do you know of any maps, particularly in Virginia, of pirate maps or relating to pirates? I don't. I know I asked our wonderful archivist here for information on maps a while ago, and she didn't pull anything up. But that's a wonderful question, and we'll look into that. Thank you for asking. Doug says, maybe some talks on North American pirates. Yes, pirates are fascinating. So I feel like that can definitely be a future talk. So thank you for bringing that up. Renee asks, what got you interested in ancient maps?
Well, one thing, just before, I will say that especially Blackbeard is, he was killed on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And like you said, you think of pirates as being
right down the road.
Yeah, right down the road. I mean, Blackbeard, he was set up there, he got married, and then he got in a fight with his wife, and he essentially, gave her away. And yeah, I would love for both you and I to take a deeper dive into some pirate talks, regional pirate talks specifically. We
can weave it into the liquor talk next month.
That's a good call. Yeah, well, one thing I will say about Blackbeard is, so Blackbeard's favorite drink, at least as was depicted in historic document, was rum with gunpowder in it. And he would take his crew beneath decks of the Queen Anne's Revenge, and he'd be under deck, and he'd put the fuses in his beard, and he'd be burning sulfur, and he'd be drinking the rum with the gunpowder in it. And it was just to kind of show his dominance over the rest of the crew, that he was this almost satanic figure, you know what I mean, in his mind and his just darkness. So yeah, no, certainly we can have a Blackbeard cocktail when we do my alcohol talk.
That sounds fantastic. So yeah, what got you interested in ancient maps, real quick?
It's really just the idea of, it's really an interest in ancient places. And then, places like Timbuktu and, just all these wonderful places that were still our epicenters of thought and beauty and culture, but certainly at a time were the epicenter, and it's that idea that just for an example, just south of Timbuktu, there was an island city in the Niger River where there was a lake with an island in it, where there was a whole kind of a spiritual movement that started, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and the city's no longer there. And it was kind of comparing maps that I was able to locate where it was. And it's just so fascinating that you can take old maps and team them up with new maps and kind of find where these places were. So it's to me, I like to exist in the physical world. I just don't like to stay home. I mean, I love to look at old maps, but it's always, for me, on a personal level, it's always about going there and being there. And places like Iraq, Afghanistan, even Somalia, these are places that's ancient kingdoms. And because of the conflict that has surrounded a lot of these areas in recent century, they've been kind of isolated, but they hold so many secrets and so much beauty that these are the places where I'm looking at these old maps and I'm like, oh my God, I mean, that was Assyria, Babylon, Sumeria was all, within a stone's throw of Baghdad. And it's just absolutely fascinating. So it's the ancient, meaning with the fact that these are still places that are here. These are still places we can go,
Great question. So Carl Nichols wants you to define map. Like, how would you define map?
How would I define map? Well, map, that's an interesting question. I mean, certainly map could be anything. It is a representation of a place. And I don't even want to limit it to a physical place. It is a detailed, well, I think most importantly, it's a detailed representation. Because we can essentially map an orange like you'd map the moon, but it's not just a picture of an orange, but it's describing the contours, the craters, the locations on the orange. So, it's
like a reflection for direction and information, maybe, or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think absolutely. It's a deeper dive to really, it's portraying anything really as a location, as a place that can be visited, whether physically or in thought, so it is certainly, we talk about an orange, we talk about it mapping your dreams, whatever it is, even the COVID maps. It's just like we're giving information, we're giving more information about a place, whether that is a physical place or a spiritual place.
So true. Cynthia asks, she said, I have another question. We love Cynthia. She's a very big supporter of Stratford. She says, the comment about the material of map paper or material protect its lines, colors, etc., reminded me to ask something. I am envisioning Washington, for example, as he is riding with his troops and the caravans carrying books, satchels, maps, etc. Could you possibly talk about the material of the carrying case? Was it leather as well? And might it have been a special type of leather to protect the contents within? Thanks.
That's a great question.
Go ahead. I think preservation of paper is a fairly new concept in conservation. I mean, I've seen it change rapidly in the last 30 years since I've started paying attention to conservation. So I'm not sure if they had particular kinds of leather back then that would have protected these kinds of maps or not. Do you know, Justin? And if not, we can find this out for you, Cynthia. So just email us.
I don't know off the top of my head.
We'll get back to you on that one. Great question, though.
One thing I will say about that is the first time I was out with a friend on the open seas on his sailboat, and he had all his maps, and he had them on the table, and we all had a glass of whiskey, and he just looked at it. It was a Scottish gentleman. He just looked at all of us, and he said, "No drinks on the chart table." And it was just, we all knew, like, oh, you just even put two and two together as a younger person who had not been, he's putting out the maps, and everyone's like putting their drinks down. He's like, whoa, no maps on the chart table. And so you had that idea that this was kind of unspoken rules, that things that were being passed down of like, oh yeah, we know how to protect our maps. Put your drinks on a coaster and take them over.
Simple things. Jeffrey says, are you aware of the restored Mitchell map and its significant depicting Virginia and the Chesapeake Bay? The Mitchell map, I know it's like,
as far as the Mitchell map I showed was the one with the Certificate of America.
1750s, yeah.
So you're saying that
sorry, just wanting to know, are you aware of the restored Mitchell map and its significance depicting Virginia and the Chesapeake Bay? I'm not, but you know what? I feel like Jeffrey, I'm going to have to do some research. What about you, Justin? That makes me excited.
Absolutely.
I'm going to write it down.
I think there's one on display at the Library of, the original one, I believe, is on display at the Library of Congress, or one of the original ones.
Question though, I'm loving all these. See, we bring out the cool map people on this talk. I'm loving it. Speaking of cool people, my brother Josh says, I expect a nice Christmas present, big brother. Not a question, but the tradition of intentionally wrong maps continued into the 1990s in Taiwan, driven by fear of takeover by the communist Chinese. Indeed. Somehow they expected the military might use the store-bought maps for invasions. Really, really interesting. Thank you, Josh, big brother. Daniel says, great talk, Justin. I agree. I was interested in what was up with that long, thin map of Rome, right? That was the craziest map. I could probably get lost in that for about 2 days. Could you remind me what its name was again, please?
Yes, I can. It's the Putinger map, but let me spell it. Why don't I just share the name with you guys real quick? If I can just share my screen, if that's okay. Just so everyone could see the Putinger map. And once again, it was named after the gentleman who had a copy of the map. Certainly was not named after the original author of the map by any means, but here it is, the Putinger map. Putinger map. And the original is from 300, and this recreation was from around 1200.
So cool.
Yeah, that map is insane. You could just look at it. It's just
get lost.
And so many of these maps, you do need, it helps to have a written academic piece explaining the actual map, because until you get your bearings with a lot of these maps, it's like you don't even know where to start. You don't even know up from down, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, this is England? That thing is England? I thought that was water. So it's really, but then once you get your bearings, it's like you really almost have to change your thought. And a lot of these maps that they're trying to essentially solve, once you kind of, like I said, once you kind of line it up with a modern map, it takes a while, but you kind of have to, it's almost like each map is almost like speaking a different language.
I love it. So interesting. Adam says, when is season 2? I love the first season. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, sir. I mean, I certainly would engage you to write to Discovery Channel and Science Channel. We've, which I'll say freely, is that our contracts were renewed, but because of COVID-19, it's an international show, and the second season is slated to be even more international. So that's been really the biggest difficulty with us starting to film, and we're really hoping that we do it. And I think we'll find out. I think we'll have a strong answer before January 1st, 2021. And but if not, if for any reason we don't renew, we'll certainly be bringing to you some all new adventures, including maps, regardless. But hopefully we'd love to do it Discovery and Science Channel.
Awesome. All right, Douglas says, or asks, sorry, were there ever maps printed on horns or bone?
I'm absolutely sure, 100%, 100%. Just as if you think about
you can draw on anything, right?
Yeah, if you think about whalers using whalebone to make cribbage boards and powder, powder horns and pipes, absolutely. If we think about using ink on bone to make pictures, whatever it is, absolutely, yeah, there would have been any kind of map that could have been made has been made. Whether it's a tattoo, whether it's made
right. Humans need them if you're going to leave your front porch. You need a map, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Josh says, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to answer this one, but we're going to find you the answer eventually. So Josh says, or asks, a little more interested in the military utilization of cartographers during the Civil War. Any specific individuals or thoughts on references to examine on this topic? I can get you some information tomorrow. I'm not sure about tonight. I am familiar with the Jedediah Hotchkiss and his service to Virginia during the war, but any other individuals I should look at on either side of the conflict? That's a great question. I don't have the answer now. I don't know if you do, Justin, but
there's, I just know that, I think it's called Maps of the Civil War. There's a book, and it's a big book, and it's big maps. Trying to find, I can't find the name of who wrote it right now, but yeah, I bought it for a good friend as a Christmas present. It was just actual maps, not just battle maps depicting things that happened, but actual maps from the Civil War. So yeah,
John, email me at kdeets@stratfordhall.org, and I will work together with my team here and Justin, and we're going to get you some information.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that question.
Stocking stuffer.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Kelly asks, hello, have you ever seen maps by Vikings in America? Do you know if any were made, or if they made any? Same thing.
I have not seen any, but by Leif Erikson or anyone, but that's that's of course I think would be the holy grail of discovery, right? If someone was to find some form of map and of course there's petroglyphs and there are things carved into stone that are map-like, and we don't know who put them there. So certainly anything that would have survived, I think those kind of voyages, unless they were purposefully entombed, like space, in a grave where it could be preserved in something, like permafrost, it's a good chance it wouldn't survive. But yeah, something that could be carved on a stone somewhere in Nova Scotia and it could just be washed away by time. It's unfortunate, but there's just we see such a tiny fraction of history, that has survived the millennia. But I'm sure they were out there,
Yeah. So in response to, I think it was Cynthia's question earlier, John David Engel said that there were hard leather tubular map cases, and it's a really great answer. So thank you for answering that. All right. John says, when did the map legend this is late. When did the map legend begin to become a feature on maps? That's a great question.
And I knew that answer earlier today.
You were like, that's when that happened.
Down, but yeah, and I apologize. When I was dwindling down, and it might have been that Italian map. But yeah, it was earlier today. I was like, I need to talk about, obviously the scale, the first scale,
right?
Legend. But I think it was been kind of some of those port maps where they really started to get, functioning tools within the map to make it easier to use. But I would love that's an answer I need to know. So I'm going to make sure I get that to you within the next 24 hours.
Yeah, so definitely email me and I'll get you in touch with Justin. Carl Nichols said, love that. Thank you both. Great talk. Thank you. Chad asks, what is the most prized map in your possession?
Currently in my collection, which it isn't here right now. I don't think it's here. But so I swam around with two friends, swam around Isle of Scotland a few years ago, which was an island in Scotland. It's a 100-mile coastline, and we swam around it for a few whiskey companies, and it was a really great expedition. And we really lived. All the swimmers had a copy of this nautical map of Isla and all the whirlpools on it, and it was very much like the one I show here, which is very much a nautical, serious chart. And when I made a plastic tube, now we're talking about protecting our maps. We're in the water every day, and I had to make sure I had this map with me. I made a plastic tube out of PVC pipe. It's probably in this room somewhere. And everywhere we went, anywhere we went to port, it's like having your cast sign. I'd have everyone sign the map. And by the end of the trip, the map had been wet and crumbling and broken. And I keep meaning to like put it in a frame with, but that map and with that map, I've vowed going forward that any expedition we go on, we're going to take a map with us, which a lot of these maps have been in the field and are just crumbling. They might have been 1,600 miles, going through East Africa or whatever, and they take on all your little notes and your scratches, and they're falling apart at the seams. But my map of Isla is probably my most special map because it's got some ocean on it,
Yeah,
and it's
and a lot of sweat, a lot of swimming, right?
And some salt and some whiskey, and yeah, that map.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm going to skip ahead we only have a few more questions left, but this is sort of on the topic. Michael wants to know what you're drinking, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you.
Sure. Funny enough, so we one of the swimmers, we're going to have a talk later this week, and he sent me a bottle of the Bowmore 12. And I thought it'd be nice to have. It's a great map whiskey, and it was one of the ones that we worked with on our swim. And it's just a great. It's also owned by the parent company that also owns Lafroig. And so this is Beach Centauri. I traveled around for these companies as their resident explorer for a season where I'd go around and give talks about my swim and about maps and about whiskey. And so there's a really nice company and a fantastic, very a nice salty peaty whiskey from Isle of Scotland. So the Bowmore 12.
That's awesome. All right. TM Fine asks, with GPS nowadays, do you think cartography or using maps are a lost art?
Well, like I said, I think that it's just a perfect example why maps are so important. As a blue collar explorer, I think some of the people who are explorers come from, a long line of either money, or maybe they made their money in the stock market and then they decide to become explorers. But as a blue collar explorer, I think it's very similar to being, in terms of getting money as an archaeologist or an academic. A lot of times you're just borrowing and stealing to get grant money to get out and do the things you want to do. And so if I get, for just perfect example, how I'd make something work is if I got money from a private donor to do a story in Uganda about textiles, I'd take a map of East Africa and I'd say, well, if we land, 2,000 miles away and drive, all right, where can we stop along the way in these different countries? And what are some of the interesting stories we can do along the way? Then I would call National Geographic, I'd call Vice, I'd call Smithsonian, and I'd send them a list of 10 stories and say, look, my expenses are covered, my travel's covered. Do you want to buy these stories? I'll have my camera team with me. I'll have a still photographer with me. So it's having that chance to like really have a grasp of where you are on the planet and pulling back and seeing what's around there. That's why I think that true cartography and like an actual physical map, and as silly as it is, like these little maps, it'll tell you where there's like an old stone church, or it'll tell you where there's, the crocodile lake. And I'm like, well, why is it the crocodile lake? So all these little maps, they're going to help you find the things you don't know you're looking for, and if you're only using GPS, you'll get to where you're going, but you might not get anywhere else. So I think that's why sitting down and really getting cozy with a map and just exploring virtually first and just playing around and looking at the different roads and, what does that little weird symbol mean? Oh, okay, there's a cemetery there. How old is that cemetery? Oh my God, that cemetery is 2,000 years old. Holy crap, we need to take a 12-hour detour and check it out. So
yeah,
that's the thing about is being on a journey is, you're there to do one thing, but the thing that really makes a difference in your life, or the thing you remember 20 years later, might have been the thing you stumbled upon.
it's true. Yeah, and it's funny too. I think that maps now are becoming more like physical ones, more like as rare as they were back, hundreds of years ago, when like only certain people actually use them because everybody has their little cell phone. But Renee says, what is your favorite map and why?
It's a tough question. My favorite map is the one I'm looking at right now, and it's because that's the place that I'm planning on going. And 100%. And it's like I'll even dream in maps before I go to a place. I remember years ago I went to Liberia and I was just obsessed with getting there, and I had a map of Liberia, and I'd go to sleep looking at the map, and I would just, in my dream, I would lower into the country in the shape of the map, and then I'd go into the country and I'd go and see the things I thought were there, which of course are never, really right. But so it's like whatever place you're obsessing about going, to me, that's the map that I'm in love with. I'm in love with the chase of finally getting to this place that I've been trying to get to, and I'm reading about and I'm learning about, but I'm not there yet. I don't know the smells, so it's whatever map is the next journey is the one that is my favorite.
Great answer. Jeffrey, both, I think, let's see here, says and asks, West Point used to teach strategy by maps of the battles of the Civil War. They were contained in one large volume of maps. Any idea where and when they were done, or where you may find a copy to purchase? So that's a question I can ask our archivist. I think she's pretty well versed in all that. So Jeffrey, email me, please, and I will get that answer to you. Cynthia asks, why do you think it took John Harrison in the 18th century to solve the longitude problem? And given that he was a clockmaker, were other map makers skilled in clockmaking or horology by chance?
Well, I think so many of these folks who were great cartographers were even, were of many talents and of many, Renaissance people, and had all these different abilities and kind of went hand in hand, and you'd really, I think some cases you'd go where the passion was, and some places you'd go where the money was. And if we think of Robert E. Lee, this military general, if this, war didn't happen, perhaps he would have gotten back into, being a surveyor and civic engineer. So it's really interesting that these skills, manifest themselves in different ways in different people.
Jordan says, thanks, Justin. Great presentation as usual. Thank you. Thanks, Justin. Great. Yeah, sorry for that. I enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. That's from TM Fine. Have a great evening. Happy travels. And our last question of the night is coming from Mark Hauser. 1755 map showing the state of Maryland clearly defined. Whoa, it just got all mixed up. All right, sorry. Sorry, there were more questions that just came in, and then I'm sorry. Hold on one second here. All right, Mike Hauser says the 1755 map showing the state of Maryland clearly defined. Was this map created after? All right, every time somebody asks questions, that question gets bumped to the bottom. After the Mason-Dixon research. The Mason-Dixon research was done in the 1760s, or what was that, I think? So I think it was before that. So that line, I think, was just built upon afterwards. Bruce Reynolds, thank you, Bruce. For the person who asked about the Book of Civil War maps, there's a website here. I hope you guys can all see this. It's via LibreNet. Let me see here. Sorry. Yeah, well, I'll get that information for you. So Bruce, you can email me. I'll put you in touch. Thank you for helping out with that question. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and close out tonight. It has been a almost 2-hour evening of maps and cartography. So I'm going to go have my own whiskey, a scotch, and sip in peace. And Justin, it is always wonderful having you on. You are charismatic and engaging and knowledgeable and humble. And it's wonderful to have you involved at Stratford. And we will see you again next month.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. It really warms my heart just to share this information. And just, I hope at least one or two of you tonight go away with a renewed curiosity for the beautiful world around us, and not only the history that is there, but the places. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Cheers. And I look forward to the next talk.
Awesome. And for all of you too, we'll have some pretty amazing maps in this exhibit coming up. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you so much.